The rain started falling as dusk settled. Not heavy but persistent. The kind of rain that falls quietly, not frantic but keeps coming, as though it had no intention of stopping. The wind rustled through the withered trees in the distance, pushing cold gusts closer. The Forest Hollow rest stop appeared in the dark, a run-down, isolated place hidden between sparse trees, its yellowish light from the awning and the Forest Hollow open 24/7 sign dim and flickering, as if ready to die. No cars, no people passing by. Only the sound of rain tapping on the tin roof and the wind howling outside the glass. There, beneath the shelter, stood a figure. A girl in a wedding dress. The white dress soaked at the hem, stained with dirt. Her arms wrapped tightly around herself, shivering uncontrollably from the cold. Her back pressed against the rusted metal post, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular, as if she had grown tired of caring about anything. One small hand lightly traced the lace on her wedding gown. Perhaps this was the dress chosen in a dream. But now it was just a wet and cold shell, heavy with things left undone. She looked down at her bare finger, where a ring was no longer there. Maybe it had never been worn. Maybe it had been taken off, thrown somewhere on the road while she ran away. The memory blurred, like glass fogged with mist. No one asked what she was doing there. No one came to pick her up. No sirens, no calls of her name. She closed her eyes, resting her head against the cold iron post, listening to the rain fall like a countdown to something about to end, or something about to begin. The smell of damp earth, cold asphalt, and mist crept into every seam of her coat, soaking into her skin, reminding her that she was really here and truly alone. In that moment, she thought of her mother. Not the mother who was angry at home, but the mother who used to stroke her hair when she had high fevers as a child, or smiled when she rode her bike for the first time without falling. Back then, everything felt lighter, and trust was never something difficult. An old truck, silver but darkened by road dust, pulled up to the stop. The headlights swept through the rain, briefly illuminating the girl's face. She didn't move. The man stepped out of the truck. Around 40. Short hair, scruffy beard, thick coat, and eyes hollow like someone who's traveled many unnamed roads. He didn't say a word. Didn't ask if she was okay. Didn't ask why she was wearing a wedding dress in the pouring rain at a stop in the middle of nowhere. He just handed her a coat. The girl took it. Didn't say thank you. Didn't refuse. She just put it on. A long silence. "My truck will leave in 15 minutes, he said, his gaze not meeting hers. "If you need to get out of the rain." Then he turned back to the truck, sitting in the cabin, leaving the door open. 12 minutes later, she stepped into the truck. Without a word. Only the sound of the door closing and the windshield wipers starting their steady rhythm on a journey no one had planned. And so they began, one who didn't know where they were going and one who had no place to return. The truck cabin was warmer than she expected. Not because it had a heater, but because the air contained no questions. No one was interrogating her. No one was asking why a girl in a wedding dress was running away. The man drove in silence. His hands gripped the steering wheel firmly, his eyes fixed on the rain-soaked road, the headlights shimmering through the downpour. She sat beside him, her eyes fixed on the windshield but seeing nothing. Only streaks of water trailing down. The rain kept falling, The wipers kept swiping, and she remained silent. The cabin smelled neither of perfume nor cigarettes. Only the scent of old fabric, metal, and faint traces of stale coffee left in a discarded paper cup behind the seat. A quiet, almost surreal world, grounded in reality. She glanced to her right, where a crumpled shirt hung from a hook and a small photo was taped to the dashboard. The face was unclear, only the shadow of a person standing by a cliffside, their back turned. The scene reminded her of somewhere far away and cold. Beneath the photo was an old yellowed note, the handwriting neat. "If you still have doubts, keep going. Stopping will only make everything sink." She skimmed the note, not asking, but her gaze lingered there just a little longer. "Are you hungry?" he asked after nearly 40 minutes. She nodded lightly, as if speaking would shatter the fragile peace of this quiet moment. He pulled over at a small diner by the side of the road, almost deserted. An old-fashioned place, neon sign flickering, the glass windows yellowed, and the wooden walls worn with time. They sat in the far corner. She ordered a hot sandwich and ginger tea. He ordered black coffee, no sugar. She ate slowly. He took small sips. The yellow light from above cast over her hands, thin fingers trembling slightly as she held the tea. The small spoon in her cup clinked with each stir, an odd sound in the stillness. The waitress gave them a quick glance, a girl in a thick coat over a wedding dress, and a man who looked like he'd just returned from a long road trip. "Do you need me to take you anywhere?" he asked, still looking at his coffee. She shook her head. Then, after a moment, she whispered, "Just take me somewhere. Far away. Don't look back." He nodded. He didn't ask any more questions. They got back into the truck and kept driving. The sky began to brighten, but the rain hadn't stopped. "On the road," he said. "My name's Walter." She stayed quiet for a moment, then answered, "I just called me May." Walter didn't ask if that was her real name. And May didn't ask why he was traveling alone in the middle of the rain, on a road no one remembered. They just kept driving, two strangers sitting in an old truck on a journey with no map. The rain began to ease. The gray clouds broke into patches, revealing a sky that looked faded, like old paint peeling away. The morning light filtered through the pine trees lining the road, casting thin streaks of sunlight on the asphalt. May closed her eyes, resting her head against the truck's window. In the fragile moment between night and dawn, she felt herself drifting away from reality. Not quite dreaming, but not fully awake, more like a silence suspended between two worlds, old and new. "Did you leave your wedding?" Walter asked, as if trying to break the heavy silence that had settled too thickly. May didn't answer right away. She opened her eyes, staring straight ahead, then quietly said, "It wasn't because I was left behind. I was the one who left." Walter nodded, as if he had guessed that from the start. "People usually think the bride's been hurt by someone," she continued, her voice slow, as though speaking to herself. "But sometimes the bride is the one who knows she's walking into a hole." Walter didn't reply. He only tightened his grip on the steering wheel. The truck kept moving, as though it too understood that some stories don't need to be fully told. "It wasn't bad," she said. "Was kind, stable, loved me. But I knew I didn't love him. And I knew I would never learn how to love." A silence passed between them. "At the last moment, I still thought I could do it. Walk down the aisle, smile, live a safe life. But when I looked into my mother's eyes and saw her cry, not out of happiness but relief, I knew I was wrong. May smiled, just a little. I ran. Didn't grab my phone. Didn't take anything. I just knew I had to go. As far away as possible. Walter glanced over at her. And you chose Forest Hollow. I didn't choose. My feet hurt, and that stop had its lights on. They both laughed, a light, small laugh, but enough to ease the coldness in the air. After a moment, Walter said, "Not everyone has the courage to leave what the whole world tells them is right." May turned to look at him, not saying anything. But in her eyes, for the first time, there was something like trust. The truck kept rolling down the winding road, the pine trees silent on both sides. The light angled through the leaves, casting a web of shadows on the road. May pulled the thin blanket Walter had given her from the back seat. She wrapped it around herself, her eyes unfocused as she watched the patches of forest slip by. "I remember once, just a few weeks before the wedding," she whispered. "I stood in the bridal room, in front of the mirror, and I felt lost in the very dress I had chosen. My sister came in. She didn't say much. She just put her hand on my shoulder, looked at me in the mirror and said, 'If you're not sure, then don't force it.'" Walter didn't interrupt. He listened quietly, as though he understood that sometimes what people need most isn't advice, but someone to truly listen. "I wish I had listened to her sooner," May whispered. "But maybe I needed to go to the edge before I knew I didn't belong there." A breeze slipped through the crack in the window. May pulled the blanket tighter around her. Walter reached to adjust the temperature inside the truck, then silently returned his hands to the wheel. And the truck kept moving. A little further, but also a little closer, between two people who had drifted apart from everything. The morning passed in silence. They passed through a small town with a few wooden houses built closely together, a bakery and the only gas station, its flag torn. Walter stopped to refuel. May stayed in the truck. The gas station had an old speaker playing a country ballad, a deep female voice echoing through the wind. May sat still, watching the people passing by. A child walked by, holding a dog. An elderly woman sat in a wheelchair on the porch. Everyone was busy living their lives. Walter returned and placed a small paper bag on the seat in front of her. Apple fritters, fresh out of the oven. She opened the bag, the smell soothing the restless feeling in her chest. "You're quiet, like you don't want anyone to know you're kind," she said. Walter smiled, but didn't answer. They kept driving, over gentle hills, the sky gradually becoming clearer. The clouds stretched out like thin threads. The wind blew, making the pine trees sway, causing the sunlight to flicker with each bend in the road. "Freedom isn't what I thought it would be," May said after a long pause. "I thought it would be like in the movies, hands out the window, the wind in my hair, laughing loud, but really, it's quiet. A little lonely. And sometimes, a little scary." Walter nodded. "Freedom is something no one teaches you how to keep. Everyone wants it, but when they finally have it, they don't know where to go." May pondered, her gaze unfocused as she followed the white line on the road. "I used to dream of freedom. But back then I thought it was about choosing what dress to wear, what to eat, what to study. Now it's different. I can turn left or right without asking anyone. But I don't know where I'm going." Walter thought for a moment. "I once knew someone like you." Someone who ran away, but not from a wedding, but from a life that someone else had written for her. May turned to him. And where did she go? Walter smiled, neither happy nor sad. To a place by the sea, and stayed there. Opened a mechanic's shop. No one knew her real name. May nodded quietly. Something warmed inside her chest. They sat in silence again. But this time, there was no sense of distance. Each of them was thinking about the roads, old and new, that had brought them here. As evening fell, Walter stopped the truck by a small lake. The water was still, like a mirror. He took a folding chair and a thermos of coffee from the truck bed. Let's stop and rest a bit. I like this place. May hesitated for a moment, then stepped out. She sat down beside him on a makeshift wooden chair. The smell of hot coffee mixed with the scent of wet grass and the cool lake breeze. A long time ago, my ex-wife and I stopped here, Walter said, his eyes looking far away. Back when everything hadn't fallen apart. May didn't ask anything. She just sat there. Silent. A duck swam across the surface of the lake, leaving a small wave behind. The evening sun cast a golden glow on the water. Dry leaves blew past May's feet. She looked down, then looked up, taking a deep breath as if for the first time in many days her lungs were finally full. Do you think people can love again? She asked softly. Walter didn't answer right away. He poured more coffee and handed her a paper cup. I think if they're patient enough to sit by this lake without saying a word, then maybe they've already begun. May smiled lightly. The first smile since they met. Not a smile to show others, but a smile because for once she surprised even herself. And they sat there, together in the midst of a nameless evening, beside a still lake that felt like a forgiveness never spoken aloud. The next morning, the air was cool. May woke up in the truck cabin, the foggy mist covering the windows. Walter was making coffee by the roadside, next to a hot water thermos he brought along. The silence was so deep that May could clearly hear the sound of water dripping into the metal filter. They kept driving, saying little. Along the way were scattered farms, a few signs for local markets and self-service fruit stands, with no one tending them. The wind blew through the crack in the window, making a continuous hum like a whisper of the old road. Walter pointed to an old wooden sign by the roadside, which read, "Fresh honey, honesty jar." May smiled. Did you ever think you'd live like this? I did, Walter replied. But I didn't have the courage. Strange, huh? She said. A person who travels everywhere but is afraid to stay still. Walter chuckled lightly as if he, too, wasn't sure whether that was right or wrong. When the sun was higher, Walter pulled into a bigger gas station, clean, modern, with restrooms, a convenience store, and a small cafe beside it. Walter needed to change the oil. May went inside to wash her face and buy a few odds and ends. She was choosing bottled water when a voice called from behind. May. She turned quickly. A middle-aged woman with neatly curled hair dressed in a beige office suit stood there, her eyes wide in disbelief. My God, it's really you. Where have you been? Everyone's been going crazy looking for you. May froze. Her heart pounded like it was reliving the moment she ran away. The woman was Linda, her mother's best friend, the one who had handled most of the wedding arrangements. I just went for a bit, May said awkwardly. Just went for a bit? You left the whole wedding? Left everyone, family, friends. Do you know how many nights your mom cried? And Thomas. I'm sorry, May interrupted, her voice trembling. I couldn't stay. I couldn't live that life. Linda stepped back slightly, her gaze softening, but her voice still sharp. But you can't just disappear like that. Did someone do something wrong to you? May looked down at the cold tile floor. No one did anything wrong. I just couldn't keep pretending. The air in the store thickened. A few strangers glanced toward them, curious. May felt a pang in her stomach, a kind of shame she couldn't name. She grabbed a bottle of water and quickly walked to the counter to pay. On her way out, she accidentally bumped into a cookie rack, knocking several bags onto the floor. A boy helped her pick them up without asking anything, just smiling before running off. That small moment eased the stiffness in her chest, just a little. Walter was waiting outside by the truck. Didn't ask anything. He just looked at her with a gaze that made all the words she wanted to say disappear. She got into the truck, sat down, and hugged the water bottle to her chest. You know her? He asked after a few minutes. Yes, I know her, but now she feels like a stranger. Walter nodded slightly, started the truck. You don't owe anyone an explanation, unless you want to. May turned to look at him, her eyes red. Thank you for not asking too much. Walter didn't reply. He just handed her a tissue from the glove compartment. May wiped her eyes, then chuckled softly. It's strange. I thought I'd never cry over this again. Usually tears come when people start to feel lighter, Walter replied. They left the gas station, leaving behind the suspicious gaze of the strange woman and a part of the past that had just been unearthed. And the road opened up again, this time quieter, but clearer in the heart of the person sitting in the seat on the right. The evening slowly descended. The last light of the day bathed the sparse forest on either side of the road in golden hues. May rested her head against the truck window, her gaze tired but more peaceful than yesterday. Walter glanced at his watch, then pulled the truck into an empty lot near a small wooden bridge. He cut the engine, pulled the handbrake, and leaned back in his seat with a soft sigh. We'll rest here tonight, he said, not looking at her. May simply nodded. She stepped out, stretched for a moment, then walked around the truck, watching the trees sway in the evening breeze. The air around them was filled with the rustling of leaves and the calls of birds echoing from the other side of the forest. An evening with no urgency. Non-waiting. When she returned to the cabin, she opened the glove compartment to grab a tissue. A soft click echoed when the compartment popped open, and inside, beside some papers, was a small old photo, its corners slightly curled. May picked it up. In the photo was a girl, about 8 or 9, her hair tied in pigtails, standing next to a young woman with a bright smile. Behind them was a small wooden house, a white picket fence, and a rope swing hanging from a tree. May turned to Walter, holding up the photo. Your daughter? Walter turned his head. A slow blink. Then he nodded softly. Her name's Ellie, he said. And the woman. That's her mother. My ex-wife. May sat quietly, not interrupting. She just looked at him, the way he used to look at her, letting it be. We lived in that house, Walter continued. In Montana. I drove cross-country, came home every weekend. She stayed home, took care of the garden, the child. Everything was fine. Until I started forgetting why I worked so hard. May let out a quiet breath. Not out of pity, but because the story was too real, too human. "Where's Ellie now?" she asked softly. Walter was silent for a long time. "Not sure." After the divorce, she moved away. Took Ellie with her. Didn't leave a number, didn't leave an address. Probably thought I didn't deserve to know. "Did you ever look for them?" "I planned to. One time, I went to the old town. But when I stood in front of the church, I turned and left. Why? Because I was scared. If Ellie looked at me and didn't remember, or worse, didn't want to remember, I don't know if I could handle that." May gripped the photo gently. Then she carefully placed it back in the compartment. "How long have you kept this photo?" "More than 10 years. She closed the compartment. Didn't ask anything more. But didn't say anything else. A moment later, Walter stepped out of the truck, bringing along a folding chair. He set it up next to the wooden bridge, pulled a notebook and a pencil from his bag. May followed, sitting down on the bridge's edge. "What are you writing?" "Road journal," he replied. "Not in detail. Just a few lines for each place." "What have you written about me?" Walter looked at her. "I haven't written anything yet." May smiled. "Then write this: the girl in the wedding dress ate all the apple fritters by herself." Walter chuckled, deep and genuine. For the first time since she met him, that smile wasn't just politeness. When the darkness settled fully and Walter leaned back in his seat, eyes closed, May was still awake. Her gaze was fixed on the dashboard where the photo had just rested. And for the first time, in her heart, there was not only her own pain. That night, the temperature dropped faster than they expected. The wind from the lake swept over them, bringing with it a quiet, persistent chill. May curled up in her seat, wrapping the thin blanket around herself, her eyes still open, staring out at the cloudy, starless sky. Inside the truck, the only sound was Walter's quiet breathing and the wind sweeping across the body of the truck like the sighs of the dark night. May couldn't sleep. Her mind raced through memories, not the moments of running away, but the times she had truly laughed as a child. The times her father held her without asking why. The times she believed that love didn't need to be endured. She pulled the blanket tighter, then carefully opened the truck door and stepped out. Walter was still sitting on the folding chair, one hand resting on his stomach, his eyes half closed. But when he heard the door, he opened his eyes and looked at her. "Can't sleep?" May nodded. She sat down on the wooden step next to him. "It's too cold," she said, her voice rough from the wind. Walter took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. He didn't say anything. After a long silence, she asked, "Do you think we're just going in circles?" Walter chuckled softly. "Maybe. But sometimes going in circles is the only way to find the direction you really want to go." They sat there for a while. No one said anything more. The wind kept blowing, and the shadows of the trees stretched across the surface of the lake like ink stains. "There's something I haven't told you," May said, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't run away just because I was scared of getting married. I also ran because I was scared I'd become my mother." Walter was silent, tilting his head to look at her. "My mom was strong." "Always strong?" "She never cried in front of me." She always said women have to endure, and I believed that for 25 years. She gripped the photo tighter. Until the day I looked at myself in the mirror, in a wedding dress, and saw a shadow exactly like hers, not in the face, but in the eyes. Eyes so tired they didn't believe they had the right to be weak. Walter nodded slowly. So that day, you didn't leave because you weren't brave enough, but because you finally admitted you didn't have to be strong anymore. May laughed. Her voice trembled. Maybe. But maybe it's also because I didn't know how to do anything else. Walter placed his large, warm hand on hers. He didn't squeeze. Didn't hold. Just let it rest there, like a shared breath. After a moment he asked, "Do you think you'll go back?" May lifted her head and looked up at the sky. "I don't know. Maybe one day. But not to apologize. But to say, I've found myself." The wind suddenly picked up. A leaf fell onto Walter's jacket. He picked it up, turning it over in his hand. "You know," he said, "I used to think my life was just a series of the same days. Over and over. Nothing to change." May looked at him, asking gently, "And now?" Walter was silent for a moment. Then he answered, "Now I think maybe the people who unexpectedly step into our truck sometimes are the reason we don't get lost anymore." And they sat there, neither of them trying to be okay, neither of them forcing a facade of being fine. For the first time, they weren't just two people running away. They were two people learning how to sit still with their pain, both their own and each other's. The next morning, the mist still clung thickly to the surface of the lake. The dew on the windows reflected the early sunlight, turning into hundreds of tiny glimmering spots, like stars that had fallen and were still lingering. Walter drove off from the lodge without asking if May was ready. She automatically sat in the passenger seat, holding the cup of coffee he handed her, her eyes distant, but no longer as sad as before. They didn't say much. They didn't need to say much anymore. The road they were on didn't have a name on the GPS map. A small, hidden turn between the pine trees led to an unfinished dirt road. But Walter drove onto it without hesitation. "Where does this road take us?" May asked. "I don't know," Walter replied. "I've seen the faded sign before, but I've never turned in. Today I thought, why not?" The truck rolled slowly through the winding paths where there were only trees and the sound of birds. No people, no houses, no rest stops. Just nature, wild and full of surprises. After a while, they arrived at an open space like a grassy field in the heart of the forest. There was a fallen tree lying across the path, like an old greeting. Walter stopped the truck. May stepped out first, tilting her head back to look at the brilliant sky above the trees. She turned back and spoke softly. "This place, it's like no one has ever been here. Everything is untouched." Walter got out of the truck, bringing two folding chairs. They sat on the grass, silently drinking coffee and sharing a few leftover cookies. "Maybe we don't need to know exactly where we're going," May said. "We just need to know we're not where we used to be," Walter replied. They looked at each other. Then they both laughed. Light, naturally, unpretentiously. After a while, May took out Walter's road journal from the back seat. She wrote on the blank page in the back, "Day 4. We turned onto a road with no name. We don't know where we're going, But we don't need to know any more. She tore the page out, folded it in half, and placed it into a small slot beside the dashboard. So next time, if anyone else sits here, they'll know there are roads, not on the map, but they lead to where we're supposed to go. Walter looked at her, saying nothing. But he nodded, a nod that said he understood everything. They sat there a while longer. The wind gently swayed the grass, and a few yellow butterflies appeared from somewhere, fluttering between the morning sun. No one spoke, but both knew they would remember this place. May took off her shoes, walking barefoot on the grass. She closed her eyes, stretched her arms out in the breeze. A brief moment, but complete, as if for the first time in her life, she stood firmly on her own feet, without feeling unsteady. Walter stood not far away, watching. Lee didn't intervene. He was simply present, an honest companion, no demands, no conditions. No one needed to ask where to next. Because sometimes just knowing you're not lost anymore is enough. And the road, nameless, with no clear destination, stretched out before them. But this time they weren't driving to escape. They were driving because they had found something worth continuing for. Appreciate you staying with us. Not everyone gets to hear the untold. If this intrigued you, drop a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the Untold Story to uncover even more.